This video is sponsored by Connell Guides. To get your hands on the most intelligent study guides on the market for GCSE and A-level English literature, as well as GCSE and A-level history, visit connellguides.com and use code RS15 at checkout for 15% off your order.
So Prince Escalus and Count Paris are two relatively minor characters in Shakespeare's play Romeo and Juliet. But just who exactly are they, and what can we say about them? Let's find out. What's going on, Revision Squad? It's me, Liam, aka Mr. Knight, aka DystopiaJunkie, and in this video we're not going to focus on one, but two characters from William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, because in this video we're going to look at how Prince Escalus and Count Paris are depicted in Shakespeare's play. To do that, we're going to do the same things as usual, which are consider who Prince and Paris are as characters, what their story roles are, and what they could be symbols, metaphors, or representations for. Then we're going to analyse a handful of quotations that relate to those characters, thinking about language, techniques, and context as we go. And then at the end of the video, I will even ask a big question, or maybe even two of them, that you might choose to respond to. Now, to make things simple, I'm going to cover each character in turn, rather than simultaneously, so this video is basically 2-in-1. To begin, we're going to focus on Prince Escalus, and then after that, we're going to look at Paris. By making a video about these two characters, my aim is to help you out as you study or revise Shakespeare's play. If I am able to do that, please do all that lovely YouTube-y stuff. Liking the video, writing a comment on it, sharing it around, you know the drill. It would also be super lovely if you could subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. It helps me to help even more people out, and so it really is a win-win situation for everyone involved. Right, video intro out of the way, let's turn our attention to Prince Escalus. Just who is he, what is his story role, and what might he be a symbol for? Right, so Prince Escalus, as his name suggests, is royalty. As the Prince of Verona, Escalus is the city-state's most senior authority figure, and so he is also in charge of enforcing the law. Prince Escalus is of course separate from the Montague and Capulet families. His only known family members in the play are Paris and Mercutio. The fact that Prince Escalus is Verona's most senior authority figure is central to his story role. When he first appears in the play, he reprimands the Montague and Capulet families and threatens them with death if they are caught fighting again, thus establishing part of the play's underlying conflict. Second, by banishing Romeo in the middle of the play, Prince Escalus sets into motion one of the play's rising actions, for he makes life more difficult for Romeo. In this sense then, Prince Escalus helps to increase tension in the play by raising the stakes. As a symbol, metaphor, or representation, Prince Escalus is pretty straightforward. Given that most of what he does in the play is set rules, boss people around, and punish or threaten to punish people for breaking the rules, I would say that Prince Escalus is the personification of authority in Shakespeare's play. Given that people in Elizabethan England generally believed in the divine right of kings, a belief that asserts that monarchs drew their power and authority from God and were therefore only answerable to God, Prince Escalus being the personification of power in Shakespeare's play seems to be consistent with this belief. So Prince Escalus then is a powerful guy who uses his power to set the rules and up the stakes, and behaves as the personification of power in Romeo and Juliet. Fantastic! Now, which quotations could we use if we wanted to analyse him? So given that Prince Escalus only appears at 3 points in the play, we're going to look at 3 quotations that relate to him, one from each scene. Our first quotation therefore comes from Act 1, Scene 1, and it is, "If ever you disturb our streets again, your lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace." Here, Prince Escalus uses the conjunction if to introduce the conditional clause ever you disturb our streets again, which he then follows up with the main clause your lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace. This sentence construction therefore sees Prince Escalus establish a hypothetical situation, telling the Capulets and Montagues what the consequences of them disturbing Verona's streets again with their fighting would be. In this case, the consequence will be their deaths, for their lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace. Here, the noun forfeit makes it clear not only that their actions will have consequences, but that those consequences will be pretty hefty and will be legally binding, thanks to the legalistic connotations of forfeit. Because Prince Escalus is able to lay down the law and assert what the repercussions will be if the Capulets and Montagues disobey him, we learn that he is an authoritative character. These words would not have the same impact if, for example, Juliet's nurse expressed them. Furthermore, Prince Escalus's dialogue not only suggests that he is an authoritative character, but that he is a somewhat violent character too, or that his authority enables him to be violent, given that the punishment he threatens the Montagues and Capulets with is death. Early in the play, Shakespeare therefore establishes a connection between authority and violence. Now let's jump to the middle of the play and consider how Prince Escalus is presented as he responds to the deaths of Tybalt and Mercutio. We're going to analyse a handful of lines here, but they're going to prompt a few different analyses, so bear with me. It will be worth it, I promise. The lines that we are going to analyse are: I have an interest in your heart's proceeding, my blood for your rude brawls doth lie a-bleeding, but I'll amerce you with so strong a fine, that you shall all repent the loss of mine. I will be deaf to pleading and excuses, nor tears nor prayers shall purchase out abuses, therefore use none. To begin, let's consider Prince Escalus's use of pronouns in these lines. The first person pronouns I and my suggest that Prince Escalus is somewhat self-centered, whereas the phrase my blood suggests that he has taken Mercutio's death personally. Mercutio and Prince Escalus are of course related, so when the prince foregrounds their relationship with the phrase my blood, we see that his sense of family loyalty may be colouring his judgment. On one hand, you could argue that Prince Escalus is somewhat petty, or that he lashes out at the Montagues and Capulets by giving them a strong fine that will make them repent, regret, or mourn the loss of his family member. Or you could argue that this just shows that he cares deeply about his family, and that familial love is important even to Verona's most powerful figure. Second, you could say that Prince Escalus is quite a stubborn character. This is evident in the simple declarative sentence, I will be deaf to pleading and excuses, with deaf suggesting that he will ignore the Capulets and Montagues' protestations or arguments because his judgment is final. This effect is reinforced by how he lists tears and prayers as being things he will not listen to, suggesting that neither emotional nor religious appeals will work on him, thus creating the impression that his mind, once made up, cannot be altered. Last, Prince Escalus's use of financial language also interests me. It is most apparent in the line, I will amerce you with so strong a fine, with fine of course bearing monetary connotations, and the verb amerce is just a word that means financially punish. Given that Prince Escalus is Verona's most authoritative figure, and presumably also its most wealthy, this makes me wonder if Shakespeare is making a passing comment about how having incredible wealth warps how people see the world. Indeed, although his kinsman has just passed away, Prince Escalus still speaks in financial terms, suggesting the importance of money to his character. Alright, let's consider our last quotation for Prince Escalus, which comes right at the end of the play. After he has been informed of the events of the play's final third, he says, Where be these enemies, Capulets, Montague? See what a scourge is laid upon your hate, that heaven finds means to kill your joys with love, and I, for winking at your discords too, have lost a brace of kinsmen. All are punished. So these lines interest me for two reasons. First, I think they suggest that Prince Escalus is a somewhat didactic, or if you're feeling less sympathetic towards him, preachy character. This is apparent in the first three lines of this quotation, for by instructing Lord Capulet and Lord Montague to see what a scourge is laid upon your hate, he instructs the two men to look at their dead children by using an imperative sentence. Now this is not a particularly kind thing for Prince Escalus to be doing. I'm sure no parent would want to see their child dead, after all. But it seems to me that he is adamant that the men look upon their children so that they can see the consequences of their feuding and learn their lesson once and for all. However, that is not to say that Prince Escalus is cruel in these lines, for I think the final two lines of this quotation also suggest that he has been somewhat humbled. The phrase winking at your discords, which means turning a blind eye to your squabbles, creates this impression. You see, Prince Escalus admits that by turning a blind eye to the Capulet-Montague feud for so long, he has lost a brace of kinsmen, a phrase meaning two family members. As such, he seems to have realised that he tried to deal with the feud too late, the consequence of which is that it escalated to a point where Paris and Mercutio died because of it. In acknowledging that he should have acted sooner and that all are punished for the feud, we see that as much as Prince Escalus might be the most powerful person in Verona, he is not the most powerful entity overall, for God or fate or the heavens have taught him a lesson as well. And before we move on to thinking about Paris, here is a quick question about Prince Escalus. If Prince Escalus is the most powerful character in the play, why is he disobeyed so much? What does that suggest about authority? You know the drill by now. You could use it to help you create a revision aid such as a flashcard, or you could even use it as the title for a short evaluative paragraph. If you do fancy writing that paragraph and are feeling especially brave today, why not share it with me down in the comments section below? I will respect your answer by giving it a read and some quick feedback, but given that I will be giving you two questions in today's video, please do make it clear which question you are answering. So, who is Paris? Well, Paris is the kinsman of Prince Escalus, which makes him part of Verona's aristocracy and affords him a high social status. This high status is also reflected in his name, for there are parts in the play where he is called Count Paris or County Paris. Now these both mean the same thing, and the version you will have printed will depend on the edition of the play you have access to. The other important characteristic Paris possesses is that he desires to be Juliet's husband. Now Paris's story role is fairly simple. He is somewhat antagonistic. Now this is not to say that he is a villain, just that his desires work against those of the play's protagonists. After all, his desire to marry Juliet directly clashes with both Romeo's and Juliet's wants. Because Paris gets in the way of the things the protagonists desire, he ups the stakes and therefore inadvertently raises tension in the play. After all, if Juliet's parents weren't trying to get her to marry Paris, wouldn't her life just be so much easier? Now, I would say that you could consider Paris to be a symbol, representation, or metaphor for two different things. Given his high social status and his relation to Prince Escalus, you could argue that he is another of the play's symbols for authority. Perhaps more interestingly though, you could also argue that Paris represents tradition, for by going to Lord Capulet and trying to get himself married to Juliet, Paris behaves in a way that was typical for the aristocracy in Elizabethan England. So that gives us a quick idea about who Paris is, what his story role is, and what he could be considered a symbol, representation, or metaphor for. But which quotations could we use if we wanted to analyse him a bit more deeply? Okay, let's begin by looking at one of the first things Paris says in the play. After Lord Capulet states that he thinks Juliet is too young to marry, Paris retorts with, "Younger than she, our happy mother's maid." So what does this tell us about the Veronese nobleman? For me, This line suggests that Paris is a persistent character who is used to getting his own way. Two words give me this impression: the comparative adjective younger and the adjective happy. The comparative adjective younger suggests to me that Paris is persistent because it sees him counter Lord Capulet's assertion that Juliet is too young to marry by reminding the patriarch that women, or girls, Juliet's junior, are in fact married off, or at least have their marriages arranged, all the time. Furthermore, because he draws on seemingly common knowledge, we can see that Paris is used to getting his own way because he dismisses Lord Capulet's parental authority over Juliet by making an appeal to popularity. In other words, Paris is almost using peer pressure on Lord Capulet. Other girls around Juliet's age, or even younger, are getting married, so why isn't Juliet? Paris's use of the term happy reinforces the impression that he is persistent and is used to getting his own way. In addition to appealing to popularity with his use of younger, this word sees the nobleman make an emotional appeal because he assures Lord Capulet that Juliet will be happy if and when she marries Paris, despite her relatively tender years. Although Lord Capulet may not be the greatest father in the world, being told that Juliet will be happy when she marries Paris because other young women are happy when they get married is hardly something that the Capulet's patriarch can dismiss. Through his persistence and use of logic, we see that Paris really is used to getting his own way then. This perhaps reveals to us just quite how powerful he is within Veronese society, because he is not used to taking no for an answer. So based on that first impression we get of Paris, I think we could be excused for assuming he is a character who only cares about what he wants. However, something he says in Act 3, following the news of Tybalt's death and Juliet's subsequent sadness, might modify this. Let's look at a handful of lines he says, which are: "These times of woe afford no times to woo. Madam, good night. Commend me to your daughter." Now, to be fair, we could just talk about the top line in this quotation, but I've added the ones that follow it because they help to contextualise Paris's dialogue. So in the line, "These times of woe afford no times to woo," I would argue that Paris is presented as being a considerate or thoughtful character. It is the juxtaposition between the noun woe and the verb woo that helped to create this impression for me. The noun woe is a word for immense sadness, whereas the verb to woo means to romantically pursue someone, to flirt with them, to romance them, and so on. By juxtaposing the noun woe with the verb to woo, Paris highlights the contrast between the two emotions implied by these words, sadness and happiness. Inserting the negation no between these two terms allows Paris to remark that the emotions are incompatible, and given that it is his wooing that he does not have time for, Paris is accepting that because Juliet is sad, it is not right for him to try to romance her at this time. As such, Paris is presented as considerate because he is putting Juliet's emotions before his own. Indeed, this considerateness is reinforced by how Paris then leaves the Capulet household, as seen by him saying good night to Lady Capulet, because he is removing himself from the situation and thinks that he is allowing Juliet to mourn in peace. Next, let's consider a handful of lines that Paris says towards the end of the play. Now, I'm aware that this is going to be a fairly long quotation, but I will do my best to break it down into a bunch of smaller analyses for you and help you to remember some short and specific quotations. Anyway, which lines am I talking about in particular? They are: "Sweet flower, with flowers thy bridal bed I strew. Oh woe! Thy canopy is dust and stones, which with sweet water nightly I will dew, or, wanting that, with tears distilled by moans. The obsequies that I for thee will keep nightly shall be to strew thy grave and weep." So the first impression of Paris that these lines create for me is that he actually genuinely did love Juliet. This perhaps makes him a slightly tragic character, for he loved somebody who did not love him back, somebody who was never going to love him back. If this makes you think of another prominent character in the play, hold on to that thought for just a moment, because I will be addressing that in just a bit. Anyway, Which lines, phrases or words make me think that Paris genuinely loves Juliet? First, let's consider the phrase sweet flower, a tender term of endearment that suggests to me that Paris thought Juliet was beautiful, pleasant and perhaps delicate. We could also consider his repeated references to crying in these lines, as made apparent by the noun tears and verb weep for sure, but this impression is also created by the euphemistic metaphor with sweet water nightly I will dew, because it sees Paris indirectly state that he will visit Juliet's grave each night and cry. Because Paris is so overwhelmingly upset by Juliet's death, I think it is clear that he really did love her. Indeed, the repetition of the adverb nightly in these lines also suggests that his love for Juliet was strong because he is committing himself to visiting her grave every evening. To show such devotion for Juliet suggests to me that Paris really did love her, and that his feelings for her were not just fleeting or lustful. Moving on, let's think about how Paris could be considered tragic because he loved somebody who would never love him back. To me, this recalls Romeo's feelings towards Rosaline at the start of the play, for the young Montague was besotted with her, even though she had no interest in him. Paris and Romeo may share some similarities then, an effect that is reinforced if you consider the poetic qualities of these lines. They possess a strong rhyme scheme, are full of romantic images, and are clearly indicative of someone who is deeply in love with someone else, as I've just discussed. Overall then, I wonder if, much like Romeo elsewhere in the play, Paris is presented as a patriarchal lover in these 6 lines, because he employs poetry to express the love and anguish that he feels, a key characteristic of the figure of a patriarchal lover. If you were to really run with the patriarchal lover analysis, you could even argue that these lines present Paris as Romeo's foil. Not only are they rivals in winning Juliet's affections, but their romantic strategies are pretty much identical. Given that both men suffer enormously because of the love they feel, Shakespeare makes it impossible for his audience to avoid the idea that romance is capable of causing immense sadness as well as immense happiness, thus allowing him to create a more realistic, or less romanticized if you prefer, representation of love in his play. And last of all, let's consider another handful of lines Paris says in the play's final scene. Upon noticing that Romeo is also creeping along in the Capulet tomb, Paris says, "That is that banished haughty Montague that murdered my love's cousin, with which grief it is supposed the fair creature died, and here is come to do some villainous shame to the dead bodies. I will apprehend him." There are 2 quick things I would like to say about these lines. First, the noun phrase fair creature reinforces the impression that Paris did love Juliet, given that the adjective fair was often used to compliment people's beauty. If you're after another quotation to reinforce the earlier point, there you go. Second, these lines show that because of his love for Juliet, Paris has become fiercely loyal to the Capulets and has internalized their feud with the Montagues. This is apparent in the adjectives haughty and villainous, both of which see Paris denigrate Romeo, given their negative and unpleasant connotations. He certainly isn't praising Romeo when he uses these words to describe him, that's for sure. Furthermore, the final sentence in these lines, "I will apprehend him," also shows the extent to which Paris has internalized the feud. To apprehend someone can mean to arrest him, and so this line could just show Paris performing his civic duty, given that Romeo is an outlaw because he has been banished from Verona. However, given that he has also just previously denigrated Romeo, I think his apprehension is somewhat personal. I don't believe for 1 second that Paris's decision to arrest Romeo is completely unemotional. So Paris's decision to arrest Romeo may in fact be partially inspired by the Montague-Capulet feud, and also out of revenge, given that Paris thinks Juliet died of the sadness Romeo caused by killing Tybalt. His certainty in arresting Romeo, and therefore his commitment to the feud, is highlighted by the strong modal verb will in his dialogue. Paris shows no uncertainty and is bold and determined to settle the score and see Romeo punished. Overall then, you could say that these lines show that Paris is deeply loyal to the Capulets, arguably a positive trait, or that he has been consumed by the feud, much like his kinsman Mercutio, which is arguably a negative trait. Which side of this analysis you fall on is ultimately down to you. And of that quotation analysed, that is my analysis of Paris complete. But before moving on, here is another quick question for you to consider. If you had to describe Paris in one word, what would it be and why? As with my question about Prince Escalus, there are loads of things you could do in response to that question. You could use it to create a flashcard or mind map, use it to prompt debate among your classmates and friends if you are revising together, or it could even be used as a title for a short evaluative paragraph, which you are more than welcome to write down in the comment section down below. As per usual, if you are feeling brave enough to do that, I will make sure to give your response a read and some feedback too, so why not give it a go? And now that I have analysed both Prince Escalus and Paris in one video, I suppose it's time for me to wrap it up. Genuinely, I really do hope that you have found this video to be helpful and that you feel a bit more confident when it comes to studying or revising Shakespeare's play as a result of watching it. If this video has helped you out, please do consider giving it a like, writing a comment on it to let me know, sharing it around with anybody else who might benefit from watching it, and subscribing to my channel too if you haven't done so already. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember that, as always, I hope you have an awesome rest of the day. If you are revising, please do take frequent short breaks, as a burned out student is not a happy or successful student, which is what I think you deserve to be. So Prince and Paris are two authority figures in Shakespeare's play, who, in the case of Paris, might also represent tradition. However, they also show us that as much as they are quite powerful authoritative figures, there are other things that are more powerful than them, such as God or fate, the stars or heavens, love for your family, or romantic love as well.